also defended Levinson in today's Rolling Stone piece. But despite that, today Levinson was still the #2 trending topic on Twitter, with people saying things like Sam Levinson is just a porn addict with too much money. You're not a twisted genius for writing torture porn with Riverdale plots. And others saying he's not only a bad writer, he's abusive, expensive, and irresponsible. Now, with all that said, as far as my opinion, I don't have one on this story yet. And that's because in general, I don't like to try to form opinions based on things I haven't seen, which is, I think, a really unfortunate thing we often see when it comes to entertainment, right? Movies, TV shows, stuff like that. Right? Sometimes the criticism or the outrage, it's right on the money. Other times, it's so fucking random and misplaced. So for me, personally, I'm gonna wait to see, but if you have thoughts on this, I'd love to hear from you in those comments down below. And then, people are absolutely furious with Volkswagen right now because reportedly they wouldn't help police locate a missing boy. Right, so it all started last week where you had this mom just north of Chicago unloading her kids from the car. Takes one kid into the house, the other one's left in the car for a few seconds. But in those few seconds, a BMW pulls into the driveway, and when the mom approaches her car, a man steps out, hits her to the ground before getting into her 2021 Volkswagen and driving off with her kids still in the car. And to make matters even worse, she was 6 months pregnant and she got run over, causing serious injuries to her extremities. But that brings us to where Volkswagen allegedly fucked up. The police contact the company to use its CarNet GPS navigation system to try and track where the missing car and kid went. However, turns out that is a premium feature and costs about $150, and the owner hadn't opted in, leading the sheriff's office to claim that VW would not track the vehicle with the abducted child until they received payment to reactivate the tracking device in the stolen Volkswagen. And so understandably, people were pissed at the company, with commenters saying they were appalled by Volkswagen's actions. Although some on Twitter were also concerned about privacy, with one user saying, of course they should have cooperated, but this is also a slippery slope for cops to access cars electronically. The major issue with that argument, though, is the fact that the mother actually wanted her car and child found. Right? It's not like the police were trying to abuse their power here. And as far as what Volkswagen has had to say about the incident, they said they have a procedure in place with a third-party provider for CarNet support services involving emergency requests from law enforcement. And adding they have executed this process successfully in previous incidents, but saying unfortunately in this instance there was a serious breach of process. And so with that, they say they're addressing the issue, though it's also unclear what a serious breach of process actually means. But the good news in this situation is that the abducted 2-year-old is now safe and sound, because about 10 miles from the home, the BMW and VW pulled into a parking lot and abandoned the kid, with business owners then noticing and calling the police, and the VW was also found shortly afterwards. But also with this, police are still looking out for the BMW, so if you live in the North Chicago area, keep an eye out for this janky-ass white BMW with a fucked-up rear bumper. Because remember, in addition to the outrage of VW, a child being abducted, a car being stolen, a fucking pregnant woman got run over. I'm glad the kid's safe and sound, but the people responsible for this are fucking scumbags. And then, so this may sound weird to you, but Greta Thunberg's actually protesting against green energy right now, with a world-famous climate activist joining hundreds of others outside government buildings in Oslo, Norway, to protest against wind turbines. Or because there are 2 wind farms in central Norway whose 151 turbines stretch nearly 300 feet high, putting them among the largest onshore wind farms in all of Europe. But the farms and the infrastructure required to support them encroach on and disturb land belonging to the Sami people, the only officially recognized indigenous group in the European Union, with the Sami arguing that the construction endangers their centuries-old lifestyle of reindeer grazing and herding, as well as stealing their land. And this dispute actually goes back, with Norway's Supreme Court ruling in late 2021 that the wind farm permits were actually invalid because they violated protected cultural rights. But despite that, the government just never acknowledged the ruling and nothing's changed. So you have Greta demanding the turbines be torn down, telling Reuters, indigenous rights, human rights must go hand in hand with climate protection and climate action. That can't happen at the expense of some people. And this morning you had Greta and 9 others being carried away from the finance ministry by police. But with whatever happens here, it also raises broader concerns about what climate activists have called the just transition, or basically the idea that we can move away from fossil fuels in one of 2 ways. 1, by running over indigenous, non-white, and poor people the world over, or 2, by safeguarding the rights of those most vulnerable to rapid, large-scale changes in the world economy. And I mean, if a country like Norway, which generated 90% of its electricity through hydropower and wind in 2020, is struggling with just transition, I mean, who is gonna succeed? At least with the just part. And then, many of you know that I'm on a mission to improve my overall health, and few things matter more than your sleep health. And that's where today's sponsor comes in. Beam. Since adding Beam's Dream Powder to my nightly routine about a year ago, it's had a noticeable impact on my quality of sleep and energy levels. I find myself winding down faster, sleeping better, and waking up feeling refreshed. And it comes in the form of a delicious bedtime cup of hot cocoa with 5 powerful natural sleep-promoting ingredients such as nano CBD, reishi mushroom extract, magnesium, I-theanine, and melatonin. And Beam's Dream Powder is now clinically shown to help you sleep better. So if you're someone who struggles with sleep, you should give it a try. And you should check out their selection of delicious flavors, from their original cinnamon cocoa to the white chocolate peppermint, peppermint. This sells out fast. It's also my personal favorite, as well as sea salt caramel and chocolate raspberry. So head over to shopbeam.com/DeFranco and use code DeFranco to get 35% off your first order when you subscribe, and then 20% off all following orders. Plus, when you subscribe to Dream Powder, you'll receive a free frother with your first order. Plus, you can pause, skip, or cancel anytime, so there's no risk. So get some sleep, you beautiful bastards. And then the Supreme Court's gonna kill Biden's plan to erase more than $400 billion in student debt for over 40 million Americans. Or at least that's what the High Court's conservative majority seemed to indicate yesterday during oral arguments. Or because there's two cases seeking to repeal Biden's plan to forgive $10,000 in debt for those earning less than $125,000 a year, and for $20,000 Pell Grant recipients. And as far as the specifics, the first case was brought by a group of 6 Republican-led states that argue that Biden does not have the authority to implement this plan without congressional approval. And that is something that 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court appeared to support, with them specifically zeroing in on what's known as the major questions doctrine, which states that the executive branch needs congressional authorization to make sweeping policy changes. And Chief Justice John Roberts saying,
I think most casual observers would say if you're going to give up that much amount of money, if you're going to affect the obligations of that many Americans on a subject that's of great controversy, they would think that's something for Congress to act on.
And this major questions doctrine is something that the court's conservatives have invoked a number of times recently. This including limiting the EPA's ability to fight climate change, as well as to strike down a number of COVID-related policies like the federal eviction moratorium and workplace vaccine mandates. But Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar, who is representing the Biden administration, hit back by arguing that Congress had already given the executive branch this kind of authority when it passed the 2003 Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act. Right under that federal law, usually called the HEROES Act, Congress gave the Education Secretary the power to waive or modify any statutory or regulatory provision in order to protect borrowers impacted by a war or other military operation or national emergency. And that claim seemed to get support from the court's 3 liberal justices, with Justice Kagan arguing that Congress was explicit in its intentions for the HEROES Act.
Congress could not have made this much more clear. We deal with congressional statutes every day that are really confusing. This one is not.
So that was the first case. And as far as the second case, that one's very different, right? That one was actually brought by 2 borrowers, one who didn't qualify for the debt relief because her loans weren't held by the government, and another who was only eligible for $10,000 worth of loan forgiveness instead of $20,000 because he didn't have a Pell Grant. With those 2 arguing that they were left out because the administration just didn't seek public input for the program, and because they were denied a chance to urge officials to expand the debt relief, no one should be able to have it. And if their argument there, it sounds like bullshit to you, you're not alone, with both conservative and liberal justices expressing skepticism about the argument. But the conservative justices did use this as an opportunity to argue that the loan forgiveness program was unfair because it doesn't benefit everyone. And to make that point, Chief Justice Roberts presented a hypothetical situation where one person took out a loan to go to college and another took out a loan to start a lawn care business. And with that, asking, is it fair for the second person to essentially subsidize the loan for the first person through taxes? But with that, you had Justice Kagan arguing that doesn't matter.
Congress passed a statute that dealt with loan repayment for colleges, and it didn't pass a statute that dealt with loan repayment for lawn businesses.
And that also echoed by Justice Sotomayor, who argued that there is an inherent unfairness in society because we're not a society of unlimited resources. And adding,
everybody suffered in the pandemic, but different people got different benefits because they qualified under different programs.
And those arguments were also put forward by the Solicitor General, who further asserted that the fairness argument goes both ways, saying that it's unfair that more than 40 million people are being denied forgiveness because of objections from states that are not injured by the program, and 2 people who would rather end the program altogether than benefit from it. And to that point, one of the other major topics that the justices really focused on was whether the plaintiffs in both of these cases actually had the legal grounds to bring them. Or in order to sue, they need to demonstrate that they have suffered direct and concrete harm. In the first case, the states centered much of their claims of injury on the assertion that the forgiveness program could cut revenues from the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority, or MOHELA, a nonprofit entity that the state created to service loans. And the plaintiffs arguing that the losses suffered by it would impact the state of Missouri, which is one of the challengers. But there, both liberal and conservative justices hit back by noting, hey, the loan servicer didn't bring or even sign on to this lawsuit, and so it should be that entity that's suing if it was really hurt. With some of the liberal justices also asserting that MOHELA was independent enough from the state that any injuries it experiences are not those of Missouri. And then with the second case, both liberal and conservative justices kind of raised their eyebrows as to whether the 2 borrowers had the ability to sue, with Justice Neil Gorsuch expressing concerns about courts interfering with processes of government just because
2 individuals in one state who don't like the program can seek and obtain a universal relief, barring it for anybody anywhere.
But it's also unclear if these questions of legal standing are going to be enough to persuade the conservative justices to toss these cases. Though experts say that would be the most probable way for the Biden administration to kind of win these, but saying that does seem unlikely, which is why for now, it does seem like the court is going to strike down the loan forgiveness program. And that is going to be absolutely devastating for so many people, right? Because while the White House has estimated that 40 million Americans would benefit from this effort, that includes around 26 million people who have actually applied for student loan debt relief. 16 16 million of which have already had their applications approved and would have all that taken away from them. So incredibly high stakes, but we don't know which way it's going to go for a few more months. And then, it's not the sexiest story, but it's awesome news. Insulin just got a whole lot cheaper. With just today, drug maker Eli Lilly announcing that it's slashing prices for its most commonly prescribed insulin. With specifically, the company is saying that starting in the fourth quarter of this year, the company will cut the prices for Humalog, its top insulin product, as well as Humulin, by 70%. And the price of the generic version of Humalog is going to drop from $82 a vial to just $25 a vial on May 1st, which is absolutely huge because that is the lowest price for that product since before 1999. And effective immediately, Eli Lilly is expanding an existing program